All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 85 for May 1st, 2026. Let's call this one A Few Loose Ends. This is Joe Lex, creator, researcher, narrator, producer, all-around DIY podcaster. My email, jrlexjr1947@gmail.com. I just passed the 7-year mark on the podcast, and I've released biographical and historical sketches on several hundred people buried at Laurel Hill East and Laurel Hill West. The podcast was selected Best Philadelphia History Podcast. Episodes have been downloaded nearly 100,000 times. But I have hit a bit of a fallow creative period, despite my best intentions. The mid-April Biographical Bites from Bala, Laurel Hill West stories about billionaires, the May 1st episode of All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill stories about the nativist riots of 1844, they're just going to have to wait. I overcommitted myself to giving talks, doing authors events, and I had to develop three new tours at Laurel Hill West. One of them I've already given, another one I'm giving in about a week and a half, and then the third one is the Ultimate Baseball Tour. I'm going to give the 3 days before the All-Star Game here in Philadelphia. I mean, after all, we have the father of baseball at Laurel Hill West. We have the man who threw the first pitch in Major League Baseball history at Laurel Hill East. I've talked about both of them in prior podcasts. So that's what's on my plate. And until I develop new material, I'm going to read you some things that have been accumulating. These are folks that I researched in the central section of Laurel Hill East back during COVID days, and I just never converted them to a podcast. I do hope to get back to the standard podcast formats in a month or two when my creative muse decides to revisit. But for now, I'm going to tell you about a few interesting folks you haven't heard about yet. First, there is the melodiously named Francis Thomas Lilly Sully Darley. He was the grandson of painter Thomas Sully and son-in-law to Matthias Baldwin, but he made his name as a composer and a musician. Then I will tell you about the Kindred Brothers, Charles and William, who made their fortunes through various nefarious methods during the land boom out west during mid-century expansion, and then came back to Philadelphia. And brothers-in-law Louis Clark Vanuxem and William H. Potter, who left their marks on both Jefferson and Princeton universities. And then, as a bonus, something that I asked fellow guide and historian Thomas Keels to record months ago, and he kindly did it, and I never used it. I was going to do a special podcast about Mount Vernon Cemetery. I want to use the segment that he did on Louisa Drew and the Barrymores. So that will be kind of a bonus for you also. So it's still going to be a 4-part podcast, but it's not going to be the typical thing that you're used to hearing when I tie everything together. These people are really not that related to each other, but each of them has a fascinating story. Let's get started. Francis Thomas Lilly Sully Darley, 1833-1914, the best organist in the city. Anyone who knows anything about Laurel Hill East is aware of the Matthias Baldwin plot, the Millionaire's Row in Section K. Matthias Baldwin, 1795 to 1866. His obelisk is iconic. It's topped by a globe with railroad tracks that circumscribe it. Baldwin became one of the richest men in the city through his locomotives. I talked about him in a podcast just last month. Most people, including me, do not examine the graves of other members of the family who are interred in that plot. Most people who know Laurel Hill also know about the gravesite of painter Thomas Sully, 1783, 1872. In fact, he died the same week that General George Gordon Meade died. They were buried like 2 or 3 days apart from each other. Thomas Sully is in Section A, along with his daughter, Blanche Sully, who stood in for Queen Victoria in Sully's classic 1838 painting. Rosalie Kemble Sully, partially named for actor Fanny Kemble and lover of actor Charlotte Cushman. And Alfred Sully, Civil War general, artist in his own right. I talked about Thomas and Alfred in All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 6, Fathers and Sons. I haven't done a podcast about Blanche and Rosalie yet. If you want more on Rosalie Sully, go listen to Adventures in Theater History, and Peter Schmitz will tell you about Rosalie's affairs with Charlotte Cushman. It was while I was reading a fascinating family history of Matthias Baldwin at the baldwinparkphilly.org site that I discovered the previously unknown to me Francis Thomas Lilly Sully Darley, 1833-1914, grandson of Thomas Sully, son-in-law of Matthias Baldwin. I had no idea there was a familial connection between these two families. Francis's mother was Jane Cooper Sully, 1807-1877, second daughter of Thomas and his wife Sarah Anna Sully, 1779-1867. On February 16, 1833, Jane Cooper Sully married William Henry Westray Darley, 1801-1872, and Francis was born 10 months later. One of Thomas Sully's most admired portraits is an 1840 rendering of Jane with Francis and their pet dog. His other grandfather, John Darley, came to the United States in 1790, and in 1802 he served under Commodore Barry as lieutenant in the only corps of Marines this country then possessed. John Darley was descended from Gaston d'Earle of France, an officer in the army of William the Conqueror. Francis apparently inherited his father's musical gifts as well as much of his grandfather's artwork. W.H.W. Darley was called the last link between the old and new schools of music in Philadelphia. He was one of several pioneers who founded societies, built up music halls, introduced oratorios, symphonies, concertos, and operas to the people of Philadelphia. He was a famed organist, an originator of the Harmonic Sacred Music Society, and an officer of the Mendelssohn Union. For many years, he was chief organist at William Henry Furness's Unitarian Church at 21st and Chestnut. Many considered him, quote, the most brilliant performer in the city, end quote. One of William's brothers and Francis's uncle was Felix Octavius Carr Darley, better known as F.O.C. Darley, 1821 to 1888, who's buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Born in Philadelphia, Darley was a self-taught artist who became one of the most famous book illustrators of the 19th century. He supplied lithographs for works by James Fenimore Cooper, Charles Dickens, Mary Mapes Dodge, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Washington Irving, George Leppard, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Clement Clark Moore, Francis Parkman, Harriet Beecher Stowe. F.O.C. Darley provided the drawings for the first fully illustrated edition of Irving's Rip Van Winkle and for one of the more popular editions of A Visit from St. Nicholas. Francis's parents, Jane and William, are buried together in the Sully plot next to Alfred. William's parents and 5 siblings are buried at Laurel Hill East in Section B, Lot 24. I did not investigate them any further. Francis received his early education at home from private tutors in a spacious home located where the Reading Terminal now stands. It appears that he was a gentleman or a man of leisure and invested most of his time in music. It was on April 15th, 1868, at age 34, that Francis married the daughter of Matthias Baldwin, Cecilia Baldwin, 1828-1909. She was 5 years his senior, and like her father, Cecilia was an inventor. She submitted a patent in 1890 for a device to cut corn. In 1873, they visited the Vienna World's Fair Exposition and then spent several winters in Rome and other European cities. They had no children together. Now, at some point, Matthias and his wife, Sarah Crane Baldwin, 1787 to 1883, had adopted the daughter of Matthias' sister, Mary Ross Baldwin, 1791-1872, and Orrin Colton, 1791-1855, there at Laurel Hill East in Section N. Her name, the adoptee's name, was Anna Colton, 1820 to 1890, but she took the surname Baldwin. Her descendants fill much of the Baldwin plot. One of her neighbors, Louisa Baldwin Clayton, 1853-1918, married Washington Hood Gilpin, 1844 to 1911, son of Philadelphia Mayor Charles Gilpin, 1809 to 1891, who's buried at Laurel Hill East in Section 9. They, meaning Louisa and Washington, are buried at Laurel Hill West in the Woodlawn section, Lot 120. Their daughter was interesting also. Their daughter, Anna Baldwin Gilpin, 1889 to 1920. Avid horsewoman. I talked about her when she married Marshall Shoemaker Winpenny, 1884 to 1918. He was a fourth-generation member of the Manayunk Winpenny textile family. Go back to All Bones Considered number 21, December 2020, Me and My Machine. Anna and Marshall married less than 2 weeks before he sailed to Europe to fight in the Great War, only for him to die a few months later, probably of the Spanish flu. Anna sickened in 1920, and she died in a matter of days before she reached her 30th birthday. They're both interred at Laurel Hill West, Woodlawn section, Lot 118. It's the lot right next to her parents. But this young couple, both of them dead before they were 30 of illness. Now, Francis Darley became the go-to choir master and organist in the city, especially among the upper crust. Easter, 1868, Philadelphia Inquirer, the choir of St. Luke's Church at South 13th Street, quote, sang an excellent selection of music suited to the occasion in the most acceptable manner, end quote. And in June of 1871, the graduating class of the University of Pennsylvania was treated to a baccalaureate sermon at the Church of the Holy Trinity, 19th and Walnut Streets, along with being serenaded by a 25-voice male choir under the leadership of Professor F.T.S. Darley, the organist. The choir also sang a hymn written by Darley. Now, Darley did not limit his output to religious music. In 1876, the year of the Centennial Exhibition, the Handel and Haydn Society debuted his cantata, Seven Sleepers, at Horticultural Hall with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. The Inquirer article noted that, quote, Mr. Darley has enough personal friends in this city to fill an ordinary hall, end quote. For the Easter services in 1877, the choir had expanded to 28 voices. Over the years, Darley composed short pieces such as The Last Leaf, a Ballad, in 1850, Grand March in 1851, a hymn called Blessed is He That Cometh in 1870. He wrote longer works like The 40 Thieves, a grand melodramatic romance in 2 acts in 1850, and The Magic Bell, a sacred cantata in 2 parts in 1881. But Darley's masterwork premiered a few years later. A popular fantasy play called Fortunio and His Seven Gifted Servants, published in 1843, had been a big hit at the Arch Street Theater, with John Drew in the part of King Alforite, and his wife Louisa Lane Drew, known professionally as Mrs. Drew, in the title role. If you are a listener of Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia edition, then you know about the Drews and their years of involvement at the Arch Street Theater. At that time, it was presented as a sort of fairy tale. During these troubled times in Philadelphia, 1843 is the year before the Bible Riots. Posters, boldly printed with the words Fortunio and His Seven Gifted Servants, began to appear around the city. For some reason, a rumor circulated that this strange slogan was a secret message from the Pope ordering Catholics to take up arms. The producer of the show had to explain the meaning of the secret message. Mrs. Drew is buried at Mount Vernon Cemetery across Ridge Avenue from Laurel Hill East at Lehigh. Fellow guide and historian Thomas Keels recorded a segment about Louisa Drew and the Barrymore clan, which I will also publish for you this week. Now, when impresario Joseph D. Murphy assumed management of the Lyceum Theater in 1882, he asked his old friend Francis Dalsey to write him a comic opera based on this still popular play. And on Easter Monday, 1883, the 40th anniversary of its first production, a new opera premiered to a full house, Fortunio and His Seven Gifted Servants, an operatic extravaganza in 4 scenes. One local reviewer said, quote, "The play is full of fun, and the bright and tuneful songs, arias, choruses, and concerted music generally is both sparkling and original. Mr. Darley has done full justice to this subject and has given this fairy story a melodious and mellifluous apparel that makes it thoroughly delectable. The cast of characters is notably fine. Fortunio ought to have a great run." Got to admire a writer who puts melodious and mellifluous next to each other in a sentence. A non-Philadelphian gave another opinion in The American, a national journal. "Necessarily, the composer's work on such a piece must be difficult. We know how easily the overflowing melody of Rossini would fit itself into a fairy tale, how Mozart would raise a bit of simple fable to the highest lyric beauty, or how Offenbach would make sport of it. But what Verdi would do with it is not so easy to imagine, and Mr. Darley is not a Verdi. He is, however, a very capable musician, and it is not necessarily to a composer's discredit if he has not that particular gift of light, careless, spontaneous song that seems necessary to our ideal of life in Wonderland. For all this, he has written an opera that will be heard with pleasure." Francis and his wife spent most of their married years living at the Baldwin Mansion. It's on Chestnut Street between 11th and 12th. It was built by Hartman Kuhn in 1840. One of the most magnificent domiciles in the city. When Kuhn died, it actually became home for the Union League for 2 years before Baldwin purchased it. After Matthias's death, his unmarried daughter, Mary Louisa Baldwin, 1825 to 1894, occupied it until her death, and that's when Cecilia and Francis took over. In 1895, they purchased the home formerly owned by Mrs. Bloomfield H. Moore at 510 South Broad Street. This home was designed by Furness and Hewitt. Now, you may remember Mrs. Moore, Clara Sophia Jessup Moore, 1824 to 1899. This is the woman who backed inventor John Ernst Worrell Keeley in his futile attempts to capture the ether through the disintegration of water and essentially create perpetual motion with his Keeley Motor Company. I talked about them both at length in All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 28, Bad Science. I think it was part 3 of that. Francis furnished the Broad Street mansion with artwork by his grandfather and numerous other pieces he had collected through the years. He continued his interest in music, and he served as president of the Utopian Club, one of the most famous musical organizations in the city, organized in 1879. Its membership reached as high as 250, but drifted downward during financial hard times of the 1890s. By 1900, there were only 53 members left. At this point, the organization was disbanded. The clubhouse at 1417 Locust Street, which is now a massage and facial spa, was sold for $5,500, and each member received $100. I wonder what that would be worth today. Let's see. Clubhouse at 1417 Locust Street. After Cecilia Baldwin died in 1909, Francis essentially withdrew from society. He spent his time at the Broad Street Mansion, and he summered in Atlantic City. It was there, at the Hotel Dennis, on August 22, 1914, that Francis Thomas Sully Darley succumbed to a paralytic stroke. He was 81 years old. A few days later, he was interred on Millionaire's Row in the Matthias Baldwin plot at Laurel Hill East. His meticulously written will distributed many of his art treasures to the Metropolitan Museum of New York City. Remember, the Philadelphia Museum of Art would not open until more than 14 years after he died. Original study of Victoria, Queen of England, painted from life in Buckingham Palace, London, in the year 1838 by Thomas Sully of Philadelphia, for which likeness Her Majesty gave Mr. Sully 4 sittings. What he doesn't say in the will is that the daughter Blanche actually wore the crown and the robe for most of the paintings. The Queen posed for the facial part. But there were many, many people who were trying to paint her at this time. She had just ascended to the throne the year before. And Sully was only one of many painters who were trying to get a picture of her at this time. Portrait of the Artist's Wife by Thomas Sully, being the original painting from life of Sarah Annis, the wife of Thomas Sully, and painted by him in the year 1838. Portrait of Rosalie Kemble Sully, daughter of Thomas Sully, and painted by him from life in Philadelphia, 1838. Full-length portrait of Mother and Son by Thomas Sully, being an original full-length portrait of Jane Cooper Sully, daughter of Thomas Sully, afterward Mrs. William H.W. Darley, and her son, Francis T. Sully Darley. And to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, he left, quote, a group of marble statues executed by Donato Barcaglia, entitled Awakening of the Sleepers, end quote. I do not find this, or for that matter, any works by Barcaglia in PAFA's online catalog of holdings, so I don't know what happened to those marbles. His will was neatly typed, double-spaced, it goes on for 12 pages, disperses cash to friends, house servants, organizations like the Pennsylvania Society to Protect Children from Cruelty, the Children's Homeopathic Hospital of Philadelphia, and the Home for Aged and Infirmed Colored Persons. His South Broad Street mansion next became the property of John Graver Johnson. 1841-1917. Johnson is interred at Ivy Hill Cemetery. When John Graver Johnson died in 1917, Time magazine called him, quote, the greatest lawyer in the English-speaking world, end quote. He argued before the United States Supreme Court 168 times during his career. And you can find more about the amazing story of Johnson's art collection in the blog phillyhistory.org. It's from December of 2017. It's an article called The John G. Johnson Art Collection on Broad Street. All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 85, Part 3, The Vanuxem Potter Clan. This is Section J, Lot 44 in Laurel Hill East. I want to tell you about 3 people who are buried in the same plot at Laurel Hill East. Section J. Not one, but two modest obelisks highlight this beautifully landscaped plot, along with several smaller stones as individual monuments. The three main people I want to talk about are Frederick William Vanuxem, one word, 1829 to 1880, Louis Clark Vanuxem, 1859 to 1903, and William H. Potter, 1852, 1926. The Vanuxem family has been in America since the 1700s. Huguenots, they immigrated from France. James Vanuxem, 1790-1877, was a business contemporary of Stephen Girard. He hosted Marquis de Lafayette during the 1824 visit to Philadelphia when they celebrated 50 years since the American Revolution. This Vanuxem is buried in Dublin, Indiana. His younger brother, Lardner Vanuxem, 1792 to 1848, was a famed American geologist who studied in Paris and taught at South Carolina College. At the time of his death, Lardner Vanuxem's private collection of mineral and geological specimens was, quote, the largest, best arranged, and most valuable private collection in the country, end quote. Lardner is buried at St. James Episcopal Churchyard in Bristol, Pennsylvania. Frederick William Vanuxem, born in Cuba, 1829. He was the son of Louis C. Vanuxem, born in Philadelphia, 1788, lost at sea, 1831. His mother was Esther M. Shoemaker, 1791 to 1840. Soon after Frederick's birth, the family moved to New Orleans and then to Philadelphia. He was orphaned before he reached his teens, and he was raised by an uncle in Bristol, Pennsylvania. He did come to Philadelphia when he was 13 years old. He got into the dry goods business with Mr. John M. Atwood and Company at 509 Market Street, and Frederick stayed with them for about 4 years. At 17, he almost joined a group of young men that were starting for China to start a business, but he heard of an opportunity to join a store in Knoxville, Tennessee, so he moved there. And when he came of age, he went into business for himself with his own general store, where he primarily sold books. He also worked as a cashier at a bank. He married Elizabeth Kennedy Vanuxem, 1836 to 1901, of a wealthy Knoxville family, and he served as deacon of the First Presbyterian Church of Knoxville. When the Civil War broke out, Frederick was conscripted into the Confederate Army, and his property was confiscated. Because of his experience in running a general store, he landed a position in the quartermaster department, quote, so that he should not be compelled to do any actual act of hostility against his government, for he was a strong Union man and loved his country too well to fight against it, end quote. After General Burnside's capture of Knoxville in late 1863, Vanuxem escaped to the Union lines and came back to Philadelphia in the spring of 1864. He had lost everything. That's the story he told. Apparently, there were many Philadelphia businessmen who lived in the South, and they told similar stories about how they'd been conscripted into the Confederate Army and did everything they could to avoid fighting their fellow countrymen. When he came back to Philadelphia, he took a position as a local agent with the Mutual Life Insurance Company of New York, and he became extraordinarily successful. The firm of Vanuxem, Bates, and Lambert eventually held about 1/6 of the insurance policies in Philadelphia. He and his wife settled into a house on Evergreen Avenue near Prospect in Chestnut Hill. And there he became an elder of the Reverend Dr. Owen's Chestnut Hill Presbyterian Church and a director of the American Sunday School Union. In 1879, July, the Vanuxem started complaining of various physical ailments, and he was found to have both liver and kidney disease. January 1880, he collapsed at home and died shortly afterwards. His death certificate gave Bright's disease, glomerulonephritis, as his cause of death. He was laid to rest January 6, 1880, at Laurel Hill Cemetery. He was only 50 years old. Now, Louis Clark Vanuxem was born in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1859, the third of 9 children to Frederick and Elizabeth. In researching him, I find that a lot of sources incorrectly refer to him as Lewis Clark Vanuxem. That's Lewisclark. Okay, well, they got the middle name right, but the first name is Louis, Louis. His siblings included Jenny Kennedy Vanuxem Potter. That was the first wife of William H. Potter. We'll hear about him a little bit later. And who else is in that plot? Because the Vanuxems and the Potters, they married sisters. That's why they have their plots together. A couple of children in that. There's a Frederick Jr., who was 8 months when he died in 1858. Lizzie Tweed Vanuxem died when she was 2 years old. Hetty Vanuxem Potter, second wife of William Henry Potter. She died in 1901. I'll talk about that a little later. Mary Vanuxem, Florence Vanuxem. So lots of other Vanuxems there. Louis was named for his grandfather, Louis C. Vanuxem, the one who was lost at sea back in 1831. Louis was brought up and prepared for college at the family home in Chestnut Hill, and he went to Princeton in 1875. His classmates in this class of 1879 were Cyrus Hall McCormick Jr., Mahlon Pitney, Associate Supreme Court Justice from 1911 to 1922, C.C. Cuyler, namesake of Princeton's Cuyler Hall, Cleveland Henry Dodge, businessman and philanthropist, and, of course, Thomas Woodrow Wilson, who later became 28th President of the United States. Louis remained friends with his classmates for life. He rarely missed a reunion. In 1878, April, Louis's older sister Jenny married businessman William H. Potter, who became a fast friend and business partner as his brother-in-law. More about him later. Back to Louis. After graduating at age 20, he started to study law, but he changed his mind and went to Germany, where he entered the University of Berlin. When his father Frederick died in 1880, Louis returned home and took over the insurance business in partnership with Princeton classmate James Breckinridge Waller Jr. They became the general agents of the New York Life Insurance Company for Pennsylvania, Ohio, Delaware, and Illinois. After the general agencies were taken over by the company due to a change in policy in 1892 that was caused by the Beers affair, he did remain with New York Life until 1895. Now, in 1891-92, there was a massive scandal involving New York Life's president, William H. Beers, and Vanuxem's name was frequently in the New York Times because of his closeness with Beers. One article even questioned a gift that Vanuxem made to Beers of a Rembrandt painting worth a staggering $12,000. He managed to escape punishment. Seems not to have suffered for his involvement with the crooked Beers. December 1894, Louis and his brother-in-law Potter made news when they purchased most of the Abraham Lincoln memorabilia that had been displayed at the World's Fair Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Included in their purchase was the old hickory chair in which Lincoln was seated when he received the telegram announcing his nomination for presidency of the United States by the Chicago Convention. That went for $140, the highest price for any item at that auction. There was an antique mahogany sofa made to order for Lincoln's height by a Springfield craftsman in 1837. The inkstand used by Lincoln when he wrote his House Divided speech. The entire law library of Mr. Lincoln, consisting of 22 volumes, and several documents autographed by Lincoln, including his marriage certificate, which went for $40. At that time, it was considered, quote, the most valuable collection of Lincoln relics in existence, end quote. And I believe it. That's an amazing collection. I actually have a pair of wooden bookends on a marble base that were taken from one of the newel posts in the Herndon Lincoln Law Office in Springfield, Illinois. My family is from Springfield. My grandmother worked at a dress shop about 3 doors down from the Herndon Lincoln Law Office. It's right across from the square where the Capitol building is located. And they had some sort of sale at this law office when my grandfather Bill went to meet my grandmother Clara for lunch. He stopped by the Herndon Law Office, the Lincoln Herndon Law Office, and picked up this set of bookends. It says Herndon on the back of it, Herndon Wood, and it gives the date. And I offered them back to the Herndon Library just a week or two ago, and they declined. So I have authentic relics, to me, every bit as valuable as the ones that Potter and Vanuxem had. Oh well. In 1895, Vanuxem resigned from the insurance business and completed his law studies. He was admitted to the Philadelphia bar in 1896, and he made a specialty of insurance law, of course, because his business career had specially fitted him for that. It was also in 1895 that Louis Vanuxem was elected a member of the Board of Trustees of Jefferson Medical College. His brother-in-law, Potter, was president of Jefferson Medical College at this time. Another board member was Simon Gratz, Laurel Hill East Chapel Section, Lot 3. Louis took a particular interest in physiology and at his own expense developed a physiology laboratory which had become world-renowned. He also laid plans for the building of a new hospital. In 1896, Louis went on a trip around the world, which lasted 18 months. And when he came back in April of 1898, he was named as a member of the National Relief Expedition. He went to Puerto Rico with supplies for the United States troops engaged in the Spanish-American War, along with brother-in-law Potter, on a yacht that was owned by Alexander van Rensselaer, who later married a daughter of Anthony Joseph Drexel. The Princeton newsletter made sure to note, quote, "Wherever he went, he made troops of friends." Louis Vanuxem was one of the best loved and most popular men in his class. He was never so happy or merry as when making others happy, and was the life and soul of every gathering. He never tired of entertaining his friends and acquaintances, and possessed an inexhaustible fund of anecdote and story. End quote. Much of Vanuxem's free time was spent at his winter home, Upatoy. I think that's the way it's pronounced. It's Upatoie. It's in western Georgia. It was the old family estate that had belonged to Lardner Vanuxem. There, Louis was named the squire of the entire countryside, the founder and supporter of the church, the schools, the promoter of all local charities and enterprises. He was a member of the Union League of Philadelphia, the University and Princeton clubs, the Netherlands Society, the Society of the War of 1812 and the Sons of the Revolution, the Orpheus Club, and others. He was also a trustee and director of the Pennsylvania Institute for the Deaf and Dumb, now the Pennsylvania School for the Deaf. Brother-in-law Potter was manager of that institution. Louis took ill December 1903, and he seemed to be recovering, but he died on December 21st. The cause of death was given as pneumonia. He was only 43 years old. He had never married. He died without known issue. The Philadelphia Inquirer published only a one-paragraph statement of death, and it spelled his name incorrectly as Lewis. He was buried in the family plot with a modest marker on December 23rd, 1903. Now, when his will was initially probated, it appeared that his entire estate of more than $1 million was to go to his uncle, William Kennedy of Knoxville. However, the New York Times published on January 9th, 1914, a statement that, quote, "A final gift of $5,000 from the estate of L.C. Vanuxem to establish the Louis Clark Vanuxem Foundation for Public Lectures." This time, they got the first name right, L-O-U-I-S, but they put an E on the Clark, so they misspelled his middle name. And then in the catalog of the College of New Jersey of Princeton, published in 1918, there is an explanation of the Louis Clark Vanuxem Foundation of Princeton University. This time they spelled both names right, where a bequest of $25,000 under the will of Louis Clark Vanuxem class of 1879 is to be used for a series of from 4 to 6 lectures before the university annually. The most recent Vanuxem lecture was late 2025 by David Krakauer on the natural history of reality, an introduction to complexity science. Other recent Vanuxem speakers: Neil deGrasse Tyson, Marcia Angel, Craig Venter, Amy Gutman, Ariel Dorfman, Joan Didion, Elie Wiesel, James Fallows, Seymour Hersh, and on and on. The lectures are still free and open to the public several times a year. You can go to this Vanuxem lecture on the Princeton campus. So let's get on to William H. Potter. He was the fourth child and the third son of Thomas, 1819 to 1878, and Adeline Coleman Bauer Potter, 1818 1896. William was born in Philadelphia, April 17, 1852. His father, who's buried at Woodland Cemetery, made his fortune through his business, quote, Thomas Potter Sons and Company, Incorporated, on North 2nd Street near Erie Avenue. They were the largest manufacturers of oilcloth in the United States. I thought that was Blaban. I thought that Blaban had the largest oilcloth, but according to this, it was Potter. Okay. Blaban is in the Egyptian Revival Monument on Millionaires Row at East. Thomas was an original member of the Union League, and in 1871, he was made president of the City National Bank in Philadelphia. William's older brother, Thomas Potter Jr., 1850 to 1910, is buried at Laurel Hill in Section J, Lot 106. He was a successful businessman who took over the family business, served in the Pennsylvania National Guard from 1887 to his death. His wife, Lilly Alexiana Wilson Potter, 1855-1954, and his daughter, Olive Potter Earnshaw Crolius, 1888-1958, survived the sinking of the RMS Titanic in April of 1912. They are also in Section J, Lot 106. Guest narrator Savannah Fisher told their story in All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 69, Section 3. William received his primary education at private schools, and he entered the University of Pennsylvania with the class of 1874, but he left school before he graduated due to the illness of his father. He had to help run the family business. He became vice president. April 25th, 1878, William Potter married Jane Jenny Kennedy Vanuxem, 1855-1897, at the Chestnut Hill Presbyterian Church. They had 4 children together. Now, Frederick Vanuxem Potter, 1879 to 1885, is buried in Section J. One of the interesting ones who's buried in Section J is Adeline Coleman Potter Ware. She lived from 1880 to 1935. She was the wife of Joseph Walker Ware, 1876-1941. Joseph Walker Ware's sister Lucretia married George Herbert Walker, 1875 to 1953. Their daughter, Dorothy Ware Walker, 1901 to 1992, married Senator Prescott Sheldon Bush, 1895 to 1972, among whose children was George Herbert Walker Bush, 1924 to 2018, 41st President of the United States. So there is that distant relationship, presidential relationship there between Adeline Coleman Potter and the President of the United States. William was taken away from business in December 1890 when President Benjamin Harrison appointed him as special commissioner to visit Paris, London, and Berlin on behalf of the state and post office departments of the United States and to negotiate the present system of sea post offices. In other words, he's the guy who set up transatlantic mail delivery. His group was given plenipotentiary powers and signed for the United States government a new treaty which was immediately approved by the Postmaster General and fellow Philadelphian John Wanamaker and President Harrison. It went into effect October 1st, 1892. This was one of the most important achievements of Harrison's term, transatlantic mail delivery. In late 1892, President Harrison appointed William as minister to Italy, and on the morning of March 17, 1893, a bomb exploded at the door of his residence, the Ancini Mattei Palace. There was slight damage to the building. No one was hurt. Potter suspected the bombing was more symbolic than anything, and really had nothing to do with him personally. He thought it might have been in response to 11 Italian Americans who were lynched in New Orleans in March of 1891. He stayed in Italy until April 1894, and he was succeeded by his fellow townsman, Honorable Wayne McVeigh. McVeigh had served as U.S. Attorney General under President James Garfield during Garfield's brief reign in office. Now, during his stay in Rome, William was vice president of the British and American Archaeological Society of Rome. His tenure of office included the critical period when there was a settlement of the complications arising from the Italian-American lynchings in New Orleans. In 1897, as a private citizen, Mr. Potter received from Humbert, King of Italy, the Order of SS Maurizio et Lazzaro, a special mark of appreciation from the Italian government. And in January 1908, he received from King Victor Emmanuel III the decoration of the Order of the Crown of Italy as a renewed mark of the affection and esteem in which he was held by the House of Savoy and the Italian government. It was when he got back from Italy in 1894 that William and his brother-in-law Louis Clark Vanuxem made their purchase of the Lincoln memorabilia. 1895, this man who had dropped out of college was named a trustee of Jefferson Medical College and Hospital. And the next year, when Joseph B. Townsend, LLD, 1821 to 1896, buried at Woodland, retired, William was elected president of the board, and he remained president of Jefferson Medical College for the rest of his life. Because of this involvement with Jefferson, William declined the offer to be ambassador to Berlin in 1897. A few years later, he was offered ambassadorship to Russia, St. Petersburg. He declined that also. It was in January of 1897 that William's wife, Jenny, had died. She was only 41 years old. All of their children were 18 years and under. William married again May of 1899 to Hetty Vanuxem, 1864-1901. This is Jenny and Louis's younger sister. They got married at Chestnut Hill St. Paul's Protestant Episcopal Church, not the Presbyterian Church this time. She died at Kennebunkport, Maine in August of 1901, barely 2 years after they had gotten married. So he had two wives die young, two sisters. In 1905, he was named chair of the Advisory Board of Citizens called to inform Mayor John Weaver against the gas lease. And in January 1907, he was nominated by the uniform primaries of both the city and Democratic parties for the office of mayor of Philadelphia. At the general election in February, William Potter received 97,000 votes against his successful opponent, John E. Rayburn, who received 136,000 votes. Rayburn, after whom the plaza is named, is buried at Laurel Hill, Section 10, lots 136 and 138. He lived from 1845 to 1914. The changes that William Potter made during his 30 years as president of Jefferson Medical College are felt to this day. For instance, the building at 10th and Walnut, now it's called the Sidney Kimmel Medical College, was constructed under his direction. During the Great War in 1915, he conferred with Dr. William Osler of Baltimore and then met in London with Ambassador Walter H. Page to establish a unit of 30 Philadelphia surgeons and physicians in France to care for wounded men. October 1917, age 65, William Potter was appointed Federal Fuel Administrator by President Woodrow Wilson, and he held that position until March 1919. That is also the year that he finally got his college degree when the University of Pennsylvania bestowed upon him the degree of Bachelor's of Arts, which he had never managed to complete earlier in his life, although he had been a university president for more than 20 years by this time. 2 years later, in 1921, Washington and Jefferson College gave him the honorary degree of Doctor of Laws. Potter was simultaneously president of the Jefferson Medical College, a member of the Board of City Trusts, a manager of the Pennsylvania Institution for the Deaf and Dumb, as it was then called, a member of the Citizens Permanent Relief Committee of Philadelphia, a member of the Board of Counselors of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, a member of the Cincinnati Society of New Jersey, of the Pennsylvania Society Sons of the Revolution, and the Society of the War of 1812. On April 24th, 1926, William Potter was stricken with acute appendicitis, and despite great pain, insisted that he be taken from his home on Stenton Avenue and Gravers Lane in Chestnut Hill, the Maples. It was torn down in 1956. The 4 or 5 miles into town to Jefferson Hospital. He lived about a mile away from Chestnut Hill Hospital. Not only did he insist that they take him to Jefferson, he specifically requested that the surgeon John Haysham Gibbon be waiting for him when he arrived. Now, this is the father of John Haysham Gibbon Jr., the 1927 Jefferson graduate who later invented the heart-lung machine. Gibbon himself was only recently recovering from an operation, but he met Potter in the operating room and he performed the appendectomy, and it looked like it was going to be a success. Remember, if it had ruptured, this is the days before antibiotics, it was felt that Potter would recover, but he died suddenly, April 28th, 1926. Sudden death like that post-op makes me think it might be a pulmonary embolism from the bed rest, especially in a heavy-set older gentleman. Interment was with the wives in the shared Vanuxem Potter plot on the 1st of May, 1926, rather than in the Potter family plot, which is literally around the corner. The Titanic survivors are around the corner from this plot. Now, William Potter was generous to those left behind. $50,000 bequest to Jefferson Medical College. His house went to his daughter Adeline. $35,000 to $50,000 for each grandchild. His entire estate was appraised just under $1 million. William H. Potter's contributions to Jefferson are memorialized today in the William Potter Memorial Prize in Clinical Medicine from a request of his daughter, Mrs. Adeline Potter Ware, and the William Potter Memorial Lecture. Both are given annually. It would be an underestimate to say that William H. Potter successfully guided Thomas Jefferson Medical School through one of its biggest periods of expansion early in the 20th century. William Potter may be the most important person in the 20th century history of Thomas Jefferson Medical School. May is an explosion of activities at the cemetery. Starting, if you're listening on the 1st, starting tonight, Cinema in the Cemetery tonight is Night of the Living Dead at Laurel Hill East, starting at 7 p.m. One of the several movies we do every year, but that is a particular favorite. Let's see, how much we're going to charge for that. Represented for Partnership, Philadelphia Film Society. Here we go, $25 general admission, $23 senior, $20 if you're a member, $2 if you're an access card holder. So that is Friday the 1st. On Saturday the 2nd is a tour at Laurel Hill East on omnibuses, Victorian transportation, and that is from 1 until 3 p.m. And then Sunday at 1 p.m. at Laurel Hill East is Stop the Presses, printers and publishers. Let's see. Wednesday, May 6th is the virtual tour. Let's say May is an odd month, so that'll be west. There'll be a virtual tour of Laurel Hill West on Wednesday, May 6th at 6:30. You have to sign up in advance. It's pay what you wish. You can pay nothing if you want to, but you need to sign up so you can get the link. And then there's a members-only mini cinema, A Bucket of Blood and Dye at Laurel Hill East. Now, this is something I have not seen before. Members only. And it says, join us for a messy, members-only mini cinema night with cult classic A Bucket of Blood and a tie-dye session. We'll have shirts ready, and you can bring your own items to dye, too. Free for anti-mortem members age 40 and under. BYO chairs and snacks, popcorn, small selection of drinks are on us. Sounds like an attempt to get people together. It sounds like it might be fun. I've got a tour coming up, a brand new tour coming up on Saturday, May 9th. This is one of the reasons that I was not able to get a more complete podcast done for May 1st. This one is called Take Me to the River, and this is at Laurel Hill West, day before Mother's Day, and that's on purpose because the last person we will visit is Anna Jarvis, the mother of Mother's Day. A lot of people are buried in the river section, and the good news is I can give you a complete tour and we will never leave the paved tarmac path. The road will take us all the way. So if you are in a wheelchair, you have somebody who has to use a scooter, this is your opportunity to go on a tour at Laurel Hill West. Saturday, May 9th, 1 until 3 p.m. Take Me to the River. And let me just give you an idea of some of the people I'm going to talk about on this one. I might even put a virtual tour up on this one. Let's see, we're going to start off with the brothers-in-law. A lot of brothers-in-law on this one, including Frederick Winslow Taylor, the father of scientific management, and his brother-in-law, Clarence Monroe Clark, who's in the Tennis Hall of Fame. Let's see, who else am I going to talk about? The other brothers-in-law that fascinate me are Robert Cooper Greer, who was an associate justice on the Supreme Court, and his brother-in-law is John Lawrence LeConte, who was the greatest beetle expert in American history. He named and described about half of the insect taxa in the United States during his career. He's considered the father of American beetle studies. So those two and many, many others to tell you about, and we never leave the paved path. So that is coming up on May 9th. Join me for that. There's a Hotspots and Storied Plots also on May 9th in the morning at Laurel Hill East from 10 until 11:30. And this same day at Laurel Hill West, a Nature Challenge Identification Day on the 9th from 10 until 1 at Laurel Hill West. Unlisted is Laurel Hill's Most Mysterious Graves, Saturday, May 16th, 10 a.m. till noon. That's going to be Patty and Tom Stringer. That's one that they give every year. There is a Chapel of Peace garden party, Sunday, May 17th, from 5 until 7. The Chapel of Peace is the area in front of the columbarium. I'm going to offer to do a columbarium tour for that, I think. Since we're going to be there, I'll take people through the columbarium if they want to know more about it. And then on Saturday, May 16th, that was, all right, day before. This calendar is a little squirrely. Nurture with Nature, Journey and Journal into Spring. There we go. Journey and Journal into Spring. Laurel Hill West. This is, let's see, working with the healing power of plants can help to decrease stress and anxiety, process grief, improve overall well-being. Hands-on May workshop. Harvesting a beautiful mix of native plant materials to create a journey stick. Journey sticks are similar to story sticks made by Native Americans that are incredibly personal, tactile, and intentional keepsakes. That sounds fascinating. Instructors, is there, $25 general admission, $23 seniors, $20 of members of the Friends. So keep that in mind. That sounds like a fun workshop to do. Sunday the 17th, we do the flag placement, preparing to honor America's heroes for Decoration Day, or if you prefer, Memorial Day. Hotspots and Storied Plots, General Tour, Friday, May 22nd, 10 a.m. till 11:30. Who will be the tour guide for that one? Oh, not listed. Okay. Don't know who the tour guide's going to be for that one. There's a members only on Friday the 22nd. This sounds really cool. It's called Bat Meet, Greet, and Release at Laurel Hill West. We're going to meet at Laurel Hill West at 6:30 in the evening. And let's see what the description is. The Pennsylvania Bat Conservation and Rehabilitation Team. They're going to talk about their role in the ecosystem. Bat Sanctuary, I guess. It's free for members. You can get a ticket online, but it's free for members. Then the next day, the 23rd, is Sacred Spaces and Storied Places at Laurel Hill West. That's a general tour at Laurel Hill West. Also, on Saturday the 23rd, a horticulture tour. Stop and Smell the Roses. That's at Laurel Hill East from 1 until 2:30. Sunday the 24th is the Memorial Day ceremony and parade, and that will be at Laurel Hill East. And that is always worth visiting because there are people there in their Civil War uniforms, women in their Victorian dress, and we have a regular Decoration Day ceremony, including a 7-gun salute. The Saturday after that, there we go. Victorian Spirit Crawl, Saturday, May 30th, 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. at Laurel Hill East. It's something we instituted just a couple of years ago. It is a twilight tour in decent weather, and there's always fun afterwards with Victorian games and lots of stuff to do. And finally, this is a new one. I just saw this. This is exciting. This is the Blue Signs, Pennsylvania Historic Markers, Sunday, May 31st, 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. And who is doing this? Let's see. Rich Wilhelm and Russ Dodge. That's a good combination. That's a great combination. So, they're going to talk about the graves at the grave sites of people who have earned their place in Pennsylvania's Blue Sign. That's a wonderful idea. I could do the same thing. I could do the same thing with West, We got enough people over at West that have their own signs that we could do something like that. So that's what's coming up as far as tours, and I'll let it go at that. You can always get more information at our website, laurelhillphl.com/events/calendar, and it's just a full month in May. I hope you can join us for at least 1 or 2 tours. Okay, let's get back to the podcast. All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 86, Part 2, Go West, Young Men, the Kindred Brothers. Charles Furman Kindred, 1846-1918. William Alfred Kindred, 1848-1891. Charles Furman Kindred and his brother William Alfred Kindred were born to John Eddie Kindred, 1810-1889, and Eunice R. Kindred, 1817-1878, in Cliffwood Valley, New Jersey. At a young age, they took the advice of Horace Greeley, and they went west. While still in their 20s, the boys went to Minnesota in the early 1870s. Charles took a position as chief clerk in the land department with the Northern Pacific Railway Company. The headquarters were in Brainerd. The company had received from the national government lands equivalent to a strip of territory 40 miles wide across the state of Minnesota and 80 miles wide across the territory of Dakota. Charles and Alfred realized that these lands were among the most fertile in Minnesota and Dakota. Prices ranged from $3 to $10 per acre. Charles was very good at profiting at the expense of both the company, which he was purportedly serving, and of the people who were buying the land. Settlers could pay for land with the preferred stock of the Northern Pacific, which they could purchase at 15 cents on the dollar. In other words, a settler purchasing a quarter section of a land, that's 160 acres, $5 an acre, could either pay the company $800 cash or he could buy $800 worth of the company's stock for $120 and pay for his land with the paper. Now, when a settler came to buy land, Charles would purchase the stock and turn this into the company, either taking the settler's money or accepting a mortgage upon the land, drawing a good rate of interest and covering the full amount asked by the railroad company. He quickly got rich. By 1881, his manipulations of the company's business had become so flagrant that a committee of the board members was appointed to investigate. The report they generated was the basis of a lawsuit which, though compromised, forced Charles to return to the Northern Pacific a large amount of money, said to be about $75,000, although it may have been much more. In any event, during his time acting as chief clerk, he accumulated a fortune of $250,000 and acquired possession of large holdings of choice land. Now, the 1880 census had permitted an increase of 2 members in Minnesota's delegation to Congress. That would give the state a boost in representation from 3 to 5 in the lower house. Before this, Minneapolis and St. Paul and all the territory to the north and across the state had been included in the 3rd Congressional District. As a result of the 1881 reapportionment, the northern half of Minnesota, comprising at that time 29 counties, became the 5th Congressional District. Charles announced his desire to be its representative in Congress, and from the beginning he made it clear that he was willing to pay whatever it took to gain that seat. He announced early that he was willing to pay $100,000 to make it happen. His political experience was limited. He had served as a delegate at the 1880 Republican National Convention in Chicago, and he threw his support to Grant for a 3rd term. We know how that turned out. But he had no experience in politics. Now, Charles' chief opponent was, and this is going to sound made up, but this is his real name, Knut Nelson. Knut was born in Norway in 1843. He was a Union veteran of the Civil War, after which he attained his U.S. citizenship. Knut moved to Minnesota's upper country in 1871, got politically involved, and was elected to the Minnesota Senate in 1874. The 1882 campaign quickly devolved into one of the most contentious elections in history at that point. The contest between Nelson and Kindred for the Bloody Fifth, as it became known, involved widespread graft, intimidation, and election fraud. At the Republican convention on July 12th in Detroit Lakes, 150 delegates fought over 80 seats. After a scuffle in the main conference center, the Kindred and Nelson campaigns nominated their candidates. The rivalry centered to a large extent on the 2 competing railroads in the upper country, the Northern Pacific in Charles' corner and the Great Northern in Knut's. Charles ended up spending between $150,000 and $200,000, and when he could not get the support of as many newspapers as he desired, he started 3 or 4 newspapers of his own, and at least one in the Norwegian language. Knut Nelson won handily, with nearly 17,000 votes over Charles' 12,200 votes. He overcame massive election fraud in the Northern Pacific counties. Minnesotans showed they were more than happy to take Charles' money and then vote against him. Knut Nelson served 3 terms in the House until 1889 and claimed to retire from politics when he returned home. But in 1893, he was elected governor of the state, and then he was appointed senator in 1895, where he served until his death in 1923. Knut Nelson's statue stands in front of the Minnesota State Capitol building. Younger brother Alfred Kindred was employed as part of the engineering corps with Northern Pacific Railroad from 1872 to 1878, involved in producing the original railroad surveys of the Red River Valley in the North Dakota Territory. In December 1878, Alfred settled in Fargo, where he formed the Red River Lands Company and became vice president of the Red River Valley National Bank. He was also one of the 23 organizers of the Fargo Southern Railroad, eventually becoming its vice president. In 1881, this group pooled $100,000 to build a railroad line from Fargo running south to Ortonville, Minnesota, 117 miles away, where they planned to link with the Milwaukee Road. Construction began in 1883. They were working without an engine, so ties and rails had to be hauled with a handcart. Following in his brother's footsteps, he had purchased 100,000 acres of fertile land along the western side of the Red River, which he sold to settlers at great profits. Alfred ended up crossing swords with James J. Hill, owner of the St. Paul, Minnesota and Manitoba Railroad, who was running a parallel railroad. Hill attempted to prevent the completion of the Fargo Southern Line, sometimes by having his men tear up and twist the rails, sometimes by placing derailed freight cars in its path. November 9th, 1883, Alfred Kindred had enough. He ordered his men to set dynamite charges along Hill's rail line near Wahpeton, and he warned Hill that his train would be blown up if he did not cease his hostilities. After many of his workers were arrested for hurling coal at Alfred's men, Hill backed down. The Fargo Southern lasted only a year before it was sold to the Milwaukee Road, becoming their Fargo branch, and the investors were paid off. Alfred was elected mayor of Fargo in 1883. In the smallpox epidemic of February 1883, he was given authority to set up a hospital, burn clothing, and force doctors to report cases. He served as mayor until 1885, and the town of Kindred, North Dakota was named in his honor in 1880. Charles and Alfred moved back to Philadelphia in 1888, but Alfred died the next year at age 43 and was interred in the family mausoleum. Charles took a job with the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. He also continued his interest in politics, although he never again ran for office. He became the boss of the 29th Ward, which ran from Poplar to Montgomery and from Broad to 23rd, and included Girard College. In 1898, he was caught up in a bribery scandal in connection with the Schuylkill Valley Water Company, when the newspapers reported, quote, Peter E. Smith, Republican City Committeeman of the 29th Ward, had offered Mr. Walter Stevenson $5,000 to vote for the water bill. Charles F. Kindred, a Reading Railroad official, had instigated the bribe. End quote. By 1900, city Republicans clearly had enough of Charles' shenanigans and worked to overthrow his rule of the 29th Ward. May 1st, Charles led a syndicate of capitalists which purchased the Philadelphia Times from the heirs of Frank McLaughlin, announcing it would continue to be conducted as a Republican newspaper. He lasted for 1 year as newspaper owner. He sold out to Adolph S. Oakes of the New York Times the next year, and eventually the Philadelphia Times merged with the Public Ledger. In October of that year, Charles was recalled by the 29th Ward Executive Committee by a vote of 66 to 23. So he submitted his resignation as representative from the 29th Ward to the Union Republican Campaign Committee. He also retired from the railroad business. Charles got out of politics, but not out of wheeling and dealing. In 1902, he made an unsuccessful effort to take over the city of Baltimore's holdings in the Western Maryland Railroad Company. When Charles Furman Kindred died in 1918 at his residence at 1500 North 15th Street, his obituary tiptoed around his various troubles and schemes. It did mention, quote, he retired from active politics about 10 years ago, and has been living upon his country estate at Grenoble, Bucks County. Mr. Kindred was a member of the Union League and a prominent Mason. End quote. Alfred's wife, Lillian M. Snow Kindred, whom he married in 1878, is also interred in the mausoleum. Charles' wife, Sarah Elizabeth Guest Kindred, 1849-1907, whom he married in 1875, died of typhoid fever and is buried there, as well as a son, Charles G. Kindred, 1880-1890, who also died of typhoid. Several other relatives, Kindreds, Elliots, Guests, and Flukers, Pflucher, all of them share this space. The most recent interment was 1995. The source for most of this was a misapplied response to opportunity, the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad and the Great Dakota Boom, 1879 to 1886, by F. Stuart Mitchell. That's from Volume 11, papers presented at the 28th Annual Meeting of the Business History Conference, 1982, pages 177 to 178. Then there's the Nelson Kindred Campaign of 1882 by Elmer E. Adams from Minnesota History Bulletin, Volume 5, May 1923, pages 89 to 107. And finally, Railroad War Played Out in Eastern North Dakota by Kurt Eriksman, the Bismarck Tribune, September 7th, 2008, page 24.
Thomas Keels for All Bones Considered, The Barrymores and Drews of Mount Vernon Cemetery. Say the name Barrymore today, and the first face that springs to most people's minds is that of Drew Barrymore, star of such Hollywood rom-coms as The Wedding Singer and Never Been Kissed, and host of a popular daytime show. Fewer people, mostly older fans of classic movies, might picture Drew's grandfather John Barrymore, the legendary star of Hollywood and Broadway, and his actor siblings Ethel and Lionel. Even fewer people would be aware that Drew Barrymore is simply the latest incarnation of an acting dynasty that has endured over 2 centuries. And only a select handful would know that today, many of these luminaries rest in the Barrymore-Drew family lot in Mount Vernon Cemetery in East Falls. The Barrymore-Drew dynasty began in America in 1828, when 8-year-old Louisa Lane arrived in America with her widowed mother. Born in London in 1820 to actor parents Thomas and Eliza Lane, Louisa made her stage debut at the age of 5. According to family legend, the Lanes had been performers for centuries, since the Elizabethan era of strolling minstrels. By the 1830s, the teenage Louisa had become one of the darlings of America's 2 great theatrical capitals, Philadelphia and New York. She played opposite the foremost actors of the day, including Edwin Forrest and Joseph Jefferson. In 1836, she wed Henry Hunt, an English opera singer, whom she left in 1848 to marry George Mossop, an Irish comedian. Mossop died only a year after their marriage. In 1850, Louisa married Dublin-born actor John Drew, with whom she had 3 children, Louisa, John Jr., and Georgiana. In 1861, the Drews acquired the down-at-heel Arch Street Theater at 6th and Arch Streets in Philadelphia, planning to restore it and become actor managers. The next year, John Drew died at the age of 34 after falling down the stairs at a party for 6-year-old Georgiana. He was buried at Glenwood Cemetery at Ridge Avenue and 27th Street on the outskirts of Philadelphia. The indomitable Louisa ran the Arch Street Theater herself. Under her management, the original neoclassical structure, designed by John Haviland in 1828, was remodeled in the fashionable Italianate style and furnished with red plush seats, gilded plasterwork, and crystal chandeliers. Philadelphians flocked to the 1,900-seat theater to see stars like Edwin Booth. Besides producing and directing plays, Louisa acted at the Arch, specializing in comic roles like Lady Teazle in The School for Scandal and Mrs. Malaprop in The Rivals. Juggling career and family, Louisa raised her children alone. A year after her husband's death, She adopted a fourth child, Sidney. As Sidney grew up and his resemblance to Louisa grew stronger, rumors circulated that he was actually Louisa's illegitimate son. Despite the whispers and despite their profession, the Drew family were considered highly respectable, with their own pew at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church at 10th and Market. All four of Louisa's children became actors, making their debuts at their mother's theater. Two of them, John Jr. and Georgiana, achieved national stardom. After many years as America's leading matinee idol, John Drew Jr. was elected lifetime president of New York City's leading theatrical club, the Players. Georgiana, universally known as Georgie, was a popular leading lady and the star of many Broadway hits. One of them was a melodrama named Pique, in which she co-starred with an actor named Maurice Barrymore. A tall, powerfully built man with brooding good looks, Maurice was a British immigrant, originally named Herbert Blythe. On New Year's Eve 1876, after a whirlwind romance, Georgie married Maurice Barrymore. The couple had 3 children, all born in Philadelphia. Lionel, born 1878, Ethel, 1879, and John, in 1882. As Philadelphia's theatrical fortunes waned, the Barrymores spent much of their time in New York or touring on the road. The marriage was a rocky one, with Georgie threatening divorce when Maurice's frequent affairs became too flagrant. Meanwhile, Lionel, Ethel, and John remained cocooned in their grandmother's home at 2008 Columbia Avenue, now Cecil B. Moore Avenue. Louisa became a surrogate parent to her grandchildren, who called her Mum-Mum. Shortly after John was born, Louisa moved to 140 North 12th Street, a short walk from her theater. The 3 children were taken regularly to Arch Street, where they would watch shows from their grandmother's private box. All 3 Barrymores attended private Catholic schools in Philadelphia after their mother Georgie converted to Catholicism. Ethel went to Notre Dame Academy, an exclusive girls' school on Rittenhouse Square. Lionel attended the old Episcopal Academy at Locust and Juniper Streets. But when he showed off his prep school education by calling the family maid a son of a bitch, he was quickly transferred to a stricter Catholic boys' academy. As a small child, John attended a junior school at Notre Dame, where he enjoyed drawing pictures of devils and demons to scare the younger pupils. In 1889, Georgie and Maurice Barrymore settled in New York, taking their children with them. 3 years later, Louisa Drew sold the Arch Street Theater and moved to New York to join her family. But the Barrymore clan began to splinter soon after their reunion. In 1893, Georgie died of tuberculosis at a California sanitarium, with 13-year-old Ethel by her side. The young girl had to accompany her mother's body on its week-long train journey across the United States for her burial at Glenwood Cemetery. Less than a year after Georgie's death, the notoriously unfaithful Maurice married another actress named Mamie Floyd. Mamie later seduced her stepson John when he was only 14, not long before her divorce from Maurice. By this time, Lionel and Ethel, who had also made their acting debuts at Louisa's Arch Street Theater, had begun their apprentices with various touring companies. A special bond had always existed between Louisa Drew and John, her youngest grandchild. With his mother dead and his father and siblings touring, John grew even closer to his mum-mum. In 1897, 15-year-old John spent a happy summer with 77-year-old Louisa at a resort hotel in Larchmont, New York. They sat on the beach looking out on Long Island Sound. Louisa read while John, a talented amateur artist, sketched. "I saw you come into this world," she told him at one point, "and now you are seeing me out of it. A fair exchange." Louisa died of heart failure at the end of the summer and joined her husband and daughter at Glenwood. Until his death, John would remember Louisa's Philadelphia household as a sanctuary. As his own life grew increasingly chaotic, his longing increased for the warmth and stability of his grandmother's home. On theatrical opening nights, the Drew and Barrymore families always sent each other red apples as gifts. Speaking of Louisa years after her death, John said, "If such a thing be possible, I know that at Heaven's Gate Mum was given not a red apple, but one of purest gold when she entered there." In March 1901, Maurice Barrymore was performing on stage in New York when he suffered a psychotic break and launched into a blasphemous anti-Semitic rant. 20-year-old John was forced to commit his father to the Bellevue Hospital insane ward with dementia induced by alcoholism and syphilis. Maurice spent the next 4 years in a Long Island asylum before dying in 1905 at the age of 58. He too joined the growing cast of Drews and Barrymores in the family lot in Glenwood Cemetery. By this time, John Barrymore had joined his brother and sister on the stage. His first professional appearance was in the Philadelphia tryout of Clyde Fitch's Captain Jinks of the Horse Marines, a star vehicle for Sister Ethel. When the show debuted at the Walnut Street Theater in January 1901, John went on as a last-minute substitute for another actor. He muffed his few lines and then ad-libbed, "Where do we go from here?" At this point, Ethel went into a hysterical state that, John recalled later, was a cross between hilarity and strangulation. John capped the evening by taking a solitary curtain call. He was dropped from the cast when the play moved to New York, where it made Ethel a star. Despite this inauspicious debut, John was soon performing on Broadway. The three Barrymores became known as the royal family of the American theater. Ethel became a leading lady in classics like Romeo and Juliet and modern-day pieces like Somerset Maugham's The Constant Wife. After an uncertain start, Lionel emerged as a popular leading man after World War I. John starred in numerous popular and classical plays and was acclaimed as the finest Hamlet of his generation. Around 1914, John Barrymore began a film career which would enthrone him in Hollywood as well as on Broadway. Between 1914 and 1941, he appeared in over 50 films, starring in such classics as Don Juan, Svengali, and 20th Century. His athletic physique made him one of Hollywood's first male sex symbols, while his striking features, especially his long, perfectly shaped nose, earned him the sobriquet, the Great Profile. Lionel also transitioned successfully to movies, becoming one of Hollywood's most sought-after character actors in the 1930s and 1940s. He starred opposite his brother in the MGM blockbusters Dinner at 8 and Grand Hotel. While Ethel made occasional forays into Hollywood, the Broadway stage remained her first love. The three siblings would appear in only 2 films together, a 1917 propaganda short for the Red Cross, and the 1932 melodrama Rasputin and the Empress. Sadly, John's love of liquor, which had first manifested itself in childhood when he chugged the dregs of adults' cocktails at family parties, blossomed into full-blown alcoholism before he reached middle age. Barrymore biographer Gene Fowler has estimated that the actor consumed 640 barrels of hard liquor over 40 years. By the late 1930s, Barrymore could no longer remember lines and was reduced to supporting roles in B-films like The Invisible Woman. He divorced third wife Dolores Costello in 1935 to live with and then marry a 19-year-old named Elaine Barry. Barrymore's fourth and final wife, Elaine, was a would-be actress whose greatest cinematic achievement was a short subject entitled How to Undress in Front of Your Husband. The two divorced in 1937, reunited, and divorced again in 1940. On May 19, 1942, John Barrymore collapsed during rehearsals for Rudy Vallee's radio show, where he had a recurring role as a washed-up ham actor. He was taken to the Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital, where he floated in and out of consciousness for 10 days while his family and friends stood by helplessly. The 60-year-old actor died on May 29th of myocarditis, complicated by cirrhosis of the liver, chronic nephritis, and gastric ulcers, all results of his alcoholism. His last words were, "You heard me, Mike," a response when his brother Lionel, whom John always called Mike, asked John to repeat himself. According to Hollywood legend, a group of Barrymore's hard-drinking buddies held a wake at the Cock and Bull Bar after his death. Among them was Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling star of epics like Robin Hood, and Raoul Walsh, the one-eyed director of High Sierra. Leaving the bar last, Flynn stumbled home to Beverly Hills and flicked on the hall lights. He stared into the bloated, bloodless face of the corpse of John Barrymore. Screaming hysterically, Flynn ran outside only to be stopped by Raoul Walsh. After leaving the Cock and Bull, Walsh and two cronies had stopped by Pierce Brothers Mortuary on Sunset Boulevard. They paid the night attendant $200 to borrow Barrymore's body, which they parked in Flynn's living room. After calming Flynn down, the three men returned Barrymore to the morgue while a sleepless night. In his will, John Barrymore expressed his desire to be cremated and to have his ashes buried in the Barrymore-Drew lot, next to his parents and beloved grandmother. By now the lot was located in Mount Vernon Cemetery, having been transferred there after Glenwood Cemetery ceased operations in the 1920s. Ethel and Lionel Barrymore overrode their brother's wishes. Instead, they had John's body entombed in a mausoleum at Calvary Cemetery, a Catholic burial ground in Los Angeles. Both would later join John there, Lionel in 1954 at the age of 76, and Ethel in 1959 at the age of 79. John Barrymore's remains rested at Calvary for nearly 40 years, until his only son decided to fulfill his father's wishes. John Drew Barrymore was born John Sidney Blythe Barrymore, Jr. in 1932, the child of John Barrymore and third wife Dolores Costello. An infant when his parents divorced in 1935, John Jr. remembered seeing his famous father only once. John decided to become an actor, just like his father. Unfortunately, John had major substance abuse issues, just like his father. His acting career was curtailed by drunkenness, drug use, violent outbursts, and frequent incarcerations. His 4 marriages produced 4 children, including Drew Barrymore, born in 1975. In December 1980, the 49-year-old Barrymore impulsively decided to have his father cremated and reburied in Philadelphia. He and his son John had the body removed from Calvary and cremated. According to legend, Barrymore decided to look at his father's corpse once it was removed from its silver-plated copper coffin. He stumbled into the car afterwards, white as a sheet, and told his son, "Thank God I'm drunk. I'll never remember it." Evidently moving the coffin had dislodged the jaw from the rest of the skull. Although most of the flesh on the face had decomposed, the great profile's long-nosed cartilage remained intact. A lawyer for the family called the Pennsylvania Burial Company in South Philadelphia to let them know that John Drew Barrymore was coming east with his father's ashes for reburial at Mount Vernon. On December 12, 1980, the cremains of John Barrymore were laid to rest in the family plot. In the presence of a single undertaker, John Drew Barrymore placed his father's ashes in the ground next to the grave of Louisa Lane Drew, covered them with dirt using his own hands, and murmured, "Now it is finished." John Barrymore was back home in the city of his birth, resting near his grandmother, his great-grandmother, his parents, and his aunt and uncles. Immediately after the interment, John Drew Barrymore flew back to California. He left behind an unpaid bill to the Pennsylvania Burial Company for $730 plus a $200 cash advance, and no plans to commemorate or care for his father's grave. When John Drew Barrymore died in 2004 at the age of 72, one obituary read that, quote, he was best known for having embraced the Barrymore predilection for hard living and reckless drinking. John Barrymore's resting place remained unmarked for over a decade. As Mount Vernon grew more derelict, some fans urged that the Barrymore-Drew plot be moved across Ridge Avenue to Laurel Hill Cemetery. Others suggested that America's foremost acting dynasty be transferred across the Schuylkill River to West Laurel Hill Cemetery in Lower Merion, where they could join other retired actors in the burial lot for the Edwin Forrest home. In the mid-1990s, a group of Barrymore fans raised the funds for a monument to mark the resting place of the great profile. It was a simple granite plaque bearing Barrymore's name, birth and death years, and the quote, "Alas, poor Yorick," a reference to his legendary performance as Hamlet. Today, as Mount Vernon gradually reopens to the public, theater lovers finally have the opportunity to visit the final resting place of one of America's greatest actors, along with the rest of his brilliant yet ill-fated clan. This is Thomas Keels for All Bones Considered.
All right, if I get my head together, if I'm back in sync on May 15th, Biographical Bites from Bala, I'm going to talk about one of the giants of 20th century communications. George Gerbner is buried at Laurel Hill West. He was a Hungarian scholar whose work brought him to Philadelphia, and he served as dean of the Annenberg School of Communications for nearly a quarter of a century. He essentially, you have to rank him up there with Marshall McLuhan as one of the great communication thinkers of the 20th century. And he's buried at Laurel Hill West. And All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Story number 87 for June is scheduled to be about celebrity corpses. People whose bodies were recruited for burial years after their deaths in order to attract new business among the city elites. You already know about Charles Thompson and David Rittenhouse, but other wandering cadavers include inventor Thomas Godfrey, hero of the Battle of Princeton, Hugh Mercer, early Philadelphia Mayor Hilary Baker, and Commodore Alexander Murray, colonial sailor. All of these men had initially been buried elsewhere and moved to Laurel Hill. Laurel Hill East and Laurel Hill West are open 365 days a year from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. now in the summer months. There's no entrance fee, never an entrance fee. We charge for the tours, of course. We raise money to support the cemetery. That's what it's all about. Public transportation to east, you've got the 61 and the 1 and the R. And if you're going to west, right now, I told you before, you can take one of the buses that comes down City Avenue, the 1 or the 44 or the 52 or the 65, and get off at Belmont and walk down Belmont and go in the back gate, I'm going to change that recommendation. Take the bus up to the corner of Bala and City Avenue. That's the stop for the Bala station. Within the last month, the Kindred Heritage Trail has been extended. It had stopped at the Kindred station for the last several years, and they finally opened it. The Kindred Heritage Trail now goes all the way to City Avenue. It picks up right there at the Bala train station, the R6. So you can walk, right now, I can walk out my front door. I can walk 2 blocks and get on a dedicated paved pathway all the way to Laurel Hill West. It's about 1.5 miles, but still, it's a dedicated pathway. I don't have to worry about traffic. Anyway, that's Laurel Hill West. Parking is good at west. It's okay at east. I talked about public transportation. Any monies that are raised go to support the cemetery to keep it looking like a historical cemetery. I mentioned also the book, All Bones Considered, 52 Laurel Hill Women. You can buy a copy when you come visit us. It's in the gift shop at the cemetery. You can buy it online from the gift shop, or you can get it from Barnes & Noble or Amazon. And again, all of the money goes to the Friends of Laurel Hill. I would like some feedback, though. I'm debating whether I really want to put all the effort into doing other books because I haven't gotten that much positive feedback on the people in the book that's already published. So I'll have to make up my mind on that. Normally I give you a bibliography at this point, but most of this stuff I did this research 4 years ago, and I have absolutely no idea what my resources were for some of this stuff. I don't think anybody will get too upset since no money changes hands with this podcast. And I apologize in advance if I took stuff from you and I didn't give you credit. I try to give credit when I remember to do it. I'm just not real good at it. So, end with an apology for a podcast that's not as... I don't think it's up to my usual standard. I'm going to try to get back in line, and once I get this river tour done. Oh, and I didn't even mention, I'm giving, in July, I'll be giving tours 3 days in a row before the All-Star Game. The Baseball All-Star Game is in Philly this year. And I'm going to do tours on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday of all of our baseball people at Laurel Hill West. It's going to be a ball. I have got about 25 people on this tour. And we've got Hall of Famers, we got Harry Wright, we got Ben Scheib, we got the guy whose name was on the baseball for more than 50 years, Al Reach. So lots of people to talk about on that special baseball tour. Keep that in mind. Look for that. Okay, I've talked enough. I'm going to cut it off here and do a quick edit so I can have this ready to go first thing on the morning of May 1st, so you will find it and be surprised, primarily because it's not what I told you I was going to give you this month. I just did not get the thing on the nativist riots done, and I will try to do that at some time in the future, but right now I almost feel super saturated with it. Okay, stay safe, stay well, maybe I'll see you on a tour. And stay above ground.